The winter of 1867 arrived early in the township of Graywick, Indiana. Snow piled heavy upon rotted roofs before All Saints' Day had passed. Ice glazed the iron cemetery gates. The townsfolk moved slower, quieter, as if the wind itself carried confessions they dare not hear. It was the boy, Ezra Lorne, who found the bodies. He had been sent by his mother to collect firewood behind the old St. Eloria Orphanage, a stone chapel turned refuge for abandoned children. The place had long been the subject of whispered warnings. Children in Graywick were taught to never linger near its gates, not for the crying heard at night, but for what wasn't heard, the silence that swallowed birdsong. Ezra had only gone around back to escape the cold, just a few stolen minutes behind the boarded bell tower, where the wind didn't cut so sharply. That's when he saw the first one. A girl, maybe 8 years old, pinned upright to the crumbling brick wall, her arms outstretched, palms nailed clean through with rusted, inch-long spikes. Her eyes were closed. At first, Ezra thought it was some cruel effigy or a punishment doll, the kind his grandmother made from twine and broom bristles to scare off crows. But then he saw her breath, barely, fogged and fading in the cold air, and then the others. 29 in total, arranged in a slow, horrible curve along the wall behind the orphanage, their bodies forming a perfect crescent, each one affixed in the same position, arms open, palms nailed, bare feet dangling inches off the frozen ground, boys and girls alike, uniforms of St. Eloria's orphanage clinging to their bodies, soaked in red that had gone black in the cold. Ezra screamed. He screamed until his voice cracked. Until old Deputy Harlan, napping 2 streets away in the rectory stables, woke thinking a fox had been caught in a wire trap. When the townsfolk arrived, Deputy first, then the Reverend, then a gaggle of pale-faced women in woolen cloaks, they found Ezra curled in the snow, eyes wide, unable to speak. What troubled Deputy Harlan most wasn't the sight of the children, not at first. It was the footprints, or the lack of them. The snow behind the chapel was untouched, save for Ezra's own boot prints. No other tracks, no wheelbarrow trails, no dragging, just 29 crucified children suspended against the wall, and a blanket of undisturbed snow beneath them. And then there was the writing, carved crudely into the limestone arch over the back doorway of the orphanage, in letters deeper than any chisel could manage. This is what faith demands. By nightfall, the county coroner had been summoned from Delacroix. A telegram sent to the state authorities in Indianapolis. But by then, the bodies were already gone. Sometime between dusk and dawn, they vanished. All 29. Not dragged, not carried, not burned. Gone. The nails remained, the blood, the message above the door. But not a single child. The only thing left behind lying in the snow beneath where Ezra had first seen the girl was a wooden rosary, snapped in half, with 3 beads missing, and a strand of black cloth torn from what appeared to be a nun's habit. No one answered the door of the orphanage that day. No candle burned in its windows. The gates were still locked from the inside, and Sister Agnes, last known custodian of St. Eloria's and sole caretaker of its children, was nowhere to be found. In the days that followed the discovery, the town of Graywick seemed to hold its breath. By November 4th, 3 days after Ezra Lorne's scream shattered the quiet, not a single candle burned within the stone walls of St. Eloria's orphanage. The door remained bolted. No movement behind its lattice glass windows. The great brass bell that once tolled every morning at 6 a.m. for prayer sat frozen in silence, as if it too feared to speak. Word of the crucified children travelled not in print, but in breath. The Greywick Parish Journal made no mention of it, no obituary, no headline. Yet in every pew, post office and kitchen hearth, it lived, a rumour wrapped in a denial too thin to cover the truth. Mrs. Dolly Muse, widow of the late station master, claimed she'd heard the wailing the night before the bodies were found. Like a choir, but all off-key. Like they were singing Latin backwards, others dismissed her. Elias Trunley, the blacksmith, said no such thing had happened at all. That boy Ezra's touched in the head. No one saw them children but him. Ain't no nails in no wall. Just rust from the rain and shadows making fools of folk. But whispers persisted. In the aisles of Baker's General, along the freezing pews at St. Gilda's, at the schoolhouse steps where children huddled in tight circles, mimicking crucifixions in twisted play, arms outstretched and eyes rolled back. Some townsfolk said the orphans were runaways, punishing the nun for cruelty. Others murmured darker possibilities, that Sister Agnes had been seen kneeling in the graveyard past midnight, that she'd asked Reverend Keller for a shovel 3 days before the snow began, saying only, "I must bury what was never born." The Reverend denied it, of course, but his face, pale, trembling, and drawn behind his frosted spectacles, spoke otherwise. By November 6th, an anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's desk, postmarked from a nearby township but unsigned. Written in tight cursive on yellowed stationery, it read, "If you search beneath the baptismal font, you will find what Greywick buried. But you must dig before the first snow thaws." The Roots remember Sheriff Coulter burned the letter, but he mentioned it only once, and only to his brother-in-law, Abel Rosser, who worked for the Rail Dispatch. Abel, in turn, told the barkeep at Grafton's alehouse. By morning, it was common knowledge. No one dared to dig. Instead, attention turned to the orphanages past, and to Sister Agnes. Born Agnes Mary, Trémaux in 1828 in Dijon, France, she had arrived in Greywick in the summer of 1859 under the banner of the Daughters of Divine Mercy. Her papers were in order, her voice soft but firm. Her eyes, according to Miss Tilling, who once served as laundress at St. Eloria's, were the colour of smoke caught in sunlight. Agnes had taken over the orphanage after the death of Sister Constance, who'd succumbed to a fever that same year. No record of illness had been noted by the local doctor. No death certificate filed. The parish simply said she'd passed peacefully in her prayers. In the 8 years since, no one else had entered St. Eloria's save the children. Supplies were dropped once a month at the gate. Flour, cloth, salt, coal, donated by the community and fetched by the older orphans. No one from the town had seen the inside of the orphanage in over half a decade, and no one had been inside since the children vanished. Sheriff Coulter ordered it boarded. 2 deputies stood watch, but even they would not linger near the place after dark. One claimed to have seen candlelight flickering behind a shuttered window. The other claimed the opposite, that the building cast no shadow at noon. On November 7th, the snow melted slightly, and the wall behind the chapel began to weep. That's how it was described, weeping. Thin streams of reddish water leaked from the mortar joints, where the nails still protruded. Cold to the touch, no smell, no taste when dared by 2 boys who fancied themselves brave. But the rumour spread like rot. The wall bleeds at dusk. And just as quickly, another change. Overnight, the crude inscription over the door, "This is what faith demands," was gone, not scrubbed, not scratched out, gone. In its place, only faint white pitting on the stone, as if the message had never been carved but merely whispered into the limestone, and the stone had agreed to speak, then forgotten. Some saw it as a sign, others a warning. But by the following Sabbath, the church pews were half empty. The baker's wife stopped lighting her stove. Reverend Keller locked himself inside the vestry and cancelled confession. And beneath every whispered word in Greywick, one name surfaced again and again, quiet as breath on a mirror: Sister Agnes. Where had she gone? Why had no one seen her? Had she fled? Had she been taken? Or, most chilling to those who dared speak it, was she still inside the orphanage? Waiting. The parish birth records from Dijon list her name plainly: Agnes Mary Tremeau, born September 12, 1828, to Emilien Tremeau, a gravedigger, and Eloise Tremeau, née Donadieu, a midwife whose license was revoked after a series of stillbirths in the summer of 1827. There is no photograph of Sister Agnes, only a fading daguerreotype of her novitiate class from 1851, taken in the shadow of the Basilique Saint-Benigne. The woman presumed to be her, second row, far left, is the only one not looking at the camera. Her head is turned slightly, eyes unfocused, lips faintly parted. A sliver of silver dust has eaten away the right side of her face. She joined the Daughters of Divine Mercy at age 23. 3 years later, her transfer was requested, not by her superiors, but by the Bishop of Dijon himself. The reason noted in the diocesan logbook is unusual in its bluntness. Her silence frightens the other sisters. By 1857, she was stationed at a sanatorium in the Vosges, a mist-choked hill province known for religious retreats and recovery homes for the sick. From there, the record goes blank, until her reappearance in 1859 in Greywick, Indiana, aboard a freight train from Montreal. The manifest lists only one piece of luggage: one wooden trunk marked with red cross, contents unknown. Heavy Sheriff Coulter, in his later report to the State Commission, described Sister Agnes as tall, upright, pale-skinned, with hands that looked never used but always busy. Her voice, when she spoke, was rarely above a whisper. She seemed to drift rather than walk. The children, when asked about her, gave varied answers. She prays in the basement. She eats only after we've eaten. She locks her room from the inside and out. She tells us stories with no ending. The orphanage itself, once a humble 2-room chapel converted by Catholic settlers in 1838, had grown strange under her stewardship. New wings were added with no official plans filed. Windows boarded without reason. By 1865, the only visible light from St. Eloria's came from a single upper window, flickering orange most nights, then going dark without pattern. Those who tried to visit were turned away. A letter from Reverend Keller, dated March 4th, 1866, offers one of the few first-hand accounts from inside. He had been summoned to administer last rites to a boy, unnamed in the letter, who had fallen ill. The walls are covered with psalms in chalk, written by many different hands. The children avoid looking at them. A strange odour, earthy and sweet, like root cellar and myrrh. Sister Agnes offered no explanation. The boy had no fever, no pulse, yet did not die. I left before dusk. I regret that now another letter, unsigned but sealed with the emblem of the Daughters of Divine Mercy, arrived at the diocesan office in Cincinnati later that same month. It read, "She is no longer ours. The order renounces her works and claims no spiritual bond with what transpires in Greywick. She has gone beyond instruction. She teaches from a book we did not give her. The book is never named. When the State Commission finally entered the orphanage on November 12th, nearly 2 weeks after the discovery, they found no children, no Sister Agnes, no bodies, no beds, no linens, nothing one might associate with the care of orphans. Instead, they found a chapel altar overturned and fused to the stone floor with melted candle wax, dozens of broken rosaries piled in a brass basin near the fireplace, walls carved with phrases in Latin and Old French, some reversed, some mirrored, a small wooden lectern splintered beneath a blackened crucifix with a missing face, and one artifact that was taken into state custody. A page torn from a ledger, dated April 1865, signed in the flowing script of Sister Agnes. The children learn in silence now. Each has chosen their hymn. We practice the stations not in steps, but in sleep. When the final night comes, they will be ready to ascend. I have fasted for 77 days. My blood is cleaner than ever. The last known sighting of Sister Agnes came from a farmhand named Joseph Merrin, who reported seeing a tall woman in a black habit walking the edge of the frozen marsh near Dorsey Hollow, 4 miles from Greywick, on November 8th, just before sunrise. She carried nothing, left no prints in the frost. When shown the daguerreotype from Dijon, Joseph only said, "That's her." But older, or maybe just more. Finished, no further sightings followed, and by December the snow had buried the orphanage roof completely. When spring thawed the land in 1868, a single white shoe was found in the chapel, placed atop the altar. Child-sized, perfectly clean. There was no blood beneath it. The first undeniable event, the one no one could explain, deny, or bury, occurred on November 14th, 1867, at precisely 4:12 a.m. A farmer named Ellis Gant, whose land bordered the northern ridge of Dorsey Hollow, awoke to the sound of church bells, 3 short tolls, each spaced by 27 seconds of silence. Gant, a veteran of Antietam, swore he hadn't heard bells like that since the field hospitals rang for final breath. The problem, of course, was that no bells in Greywick were known to function. The one at St. Eloria's had been sealed. The bell tower at St. Gilda's had been dismantled during a lightning strike in 1862. The railway station had no chimes, and yet the sound travelled clear across 5 miles, through frozen tree lines, and echoed off the empty silos by the riverbank. By sunrise, 23 townsfolk confirmed hearing it. 3 said they dreamed it before they woke. But when Sheriff Coulter and Deputy Harlan investigated the orphanage that same morning, they found the bell untouched. No soot, no disturbed snow, no vibration in the frayed rope that still hung limp in the stairwell. And yet, in the snow just beneath the bell tower's threshold, there were tiny indentations, dozens of them, bare feet, child-sized, all facing outward. They began appearing throughout the township in the days that followed. Footprints in soot across the floor of the abandoned schoolhouse. Bare footfalls frozen into the morning frost behind the bakery. A perfect circle of prints found inside the pulpit at St. Gilda's, leading nowhere. They all shared one detail. None led to their location. Only away. Then came the speaking. It began with a child named Matilda Bram, age 6, who lived 2 streets over from the rectory, just off Wintermere Lane. Her father, Alfred Bram, was a glazier who worked the church windows and occasionally delivered firewood to the Reverend's quarters. On November 16th, Matilda rose from bed at 3 a.m., walked barefoot into the kitchen, and began speaking in perfect Latin. Her family, simple Episcopalians, spoke only English. According to her mother, she recited the Sermo de Passione Domini, a sermon last printed in Latin in 1781, word for word, eyes closed, hands clasped. When a physician was summoned, Matilda bit through her own tongue mid-verse and collapsed. She would not wake for 3 days. When she did, she remembered nothing. But she asked one question. Do the nails still hold the girl up, or is she cold now? She had never been to the orphanage. The next week, the town's sole physician, Dr. Albin Norfield, wrote to the county medical board, I do not make claims of the supernatural, but I have observed 6 children between the ages of 5 and 11 speaking in tongues, drawing symbols they could not have learned, and describing Sister Agnes by name, though none had ever met her, nor seen her photograph. One boy wept in his sleep for 9 nights, whispering, it wasn't her hands that held the hammer. On November 20th, the Reverend Keller's dog, a black mastiff named Basil, was found crucified against the churchyard gate. 4 nails, no footprints. Pinned beside him was a torn hymnal page, marked with a red thumbprint from hymn number 77, the voice that echoes in the grave. By now, the whispers had become certainty. The town was cursed. Some believed it was the children seeking justice. Others said it was Agnes returning for what had not been finished. But a few, older men mostly, remembered something else. A date scratched into the side of the train station's old coal chute, long before Agnes arrived. 1867, the year the 30th child was supposed to be born. They spoke of it quietly, with unease, as if saying it aloud might call it forward. The journal of Eloise Tranter, the midwife who died in 1845 after losing her 6th child in childbirth, was uncovered by accident during a church roof repair. Pages soaked in ink and smoke, found wedged inside a rusted chimney pipe. One entry, dated March 18, 1837, stood out. The bell tolled once last night. No one heard it but me. The earth shook beneath St. Eloria's as if it groaned. The sisters say it is only winter air, but I know what I felt. One day, a woman will come who does not die like others. She will finish what the cradle began Greywick had long forgotten Eloise Tranter. But her words were suddenly, terribly alive. The townspeople turned inward. Doors locked earlier, curtains drawn tight. Children were kept from church and school. Fathers sat up at night with rifles they had not touched in years. On November 25th, the snow fell heavier than it had in 20 years, and behind the stained glass of the orphanage's chapel, a single candle flickered, then 2, then 29. By December 1st, 1867, Greywick was no longer a town of men and women. It had become a town of watchers. From attics and cellars, through slats and frost-flecked windows, the people watched St. Eloria's orphanage. The candle count had grown to 30, though no one could say when the 30th had appeared. They flickered each night behind the stained glass panes, light pulsing from behind fractured saints and warped angels, their faces melted by time or something older. Sheriff Coulter had left town without a word. His badge was found nailed to the door of the constable's office, upside down. Deputy Harlan had taken to patrolling alone, armed with a borrowed cavalry rifle from the old war chest, the barrel scratched with Psalm 34, verse 4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. On December 3rd, a young boy named Levi Hent, age 7, vanished from his bed. His mother swore she had locked the door from the inside. No window was broken. The snow outside was untouched, except for one detail. A trail of single-file bare footprints leading from the back door toward the direction of the orphanage. 29 prints, then nothing. By dawn, a note was discovered tucked beneath the boy's pillow. It was folded in perfect thirds. No ink, no handwriting. Only an indentation pressed hard into the paper. The choir is incomplete. Fear accelerated into frenzy. Families began packing wagons. Some simply left without saying goodbye. The mill shut down. The post office shuttered its windows. Reverend Keller attempted one final sermon at St. Gilda's and collapsed midway through, coughing up something black that stained the altar cloth. He died 2 days later, eyes open, locked in upward gaze, whispering Latin as if reciting Mass through the veil. His last words, according to the church keeper, were, "She never needed the nails." They just helped us understand Dr. Albin Norfield, increasingly paranoid and sleepless, took to writing long letters to the American Journal of Medicine, none of which were ever published. In one, preserved in the state archives, he writes, "I believe Graywick is suffering a mass disorder of religious delusion compounded by years of spiritual neglect. But I cannot dismiss what I have seen. 11 children across 7 homes now speak in harmony, untrained, unschooled, each reciting different parts of the same unknown hymn. When recorded and layered together, it produces a full Latin requiem. The name Agnes appears 19 times. On December 8th, the schoolhouse burned to the ground. No one saw who lit it, but the blackboard was left intact, preserved by some trick of fire. Etched into its scorched wood in nail scratches, I am not crucified. I am crowned. That night, several families fled toward neighboring Delacroix, but their wagon overturned 3 miles out. The mother, Margaret Fennell, swore that their horse halted not for snow, but for a girl in a white smock, standing in the road without casting a shadow. By December 10th, the town's population had dropped by nearly half. Those who remained spoke little, ate less, and waited. And on December 11th, a man named Thaddeus Green, the town's oldest living resident, stepped forward. He was 92, frail, near blind, and had not spoken publicly since 1851, but he summoned the remaining townsfolk to the schoolhouse ruins, where he stood before the broken bell. He brought with him a journal, a leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed, the ink faded but legible. It was a record kept by his own father, Ephraim Green, former town magistrate, and one of the original founders of St. Eloria's Orphanage in 1836. The final entry, dated July the 14th, 1837, was read aloud through chattering teeth and fearful breath. The 30th did not survive. Born bloodless, no pulse but eyes wide and fixed upon the candle. She breathed through silence. Sister Calphurnia named her Agnes, and we buried her with the others beneath the chapel floor. But I tell you now, I felt it even then. Her soul did not take root below. It climbed up, into the walls, into the hymns, into us. If she returns, it will not be alone. We must never build again. This, it seemed, was the truth that had been buried. Agnes had not come to Graywick as a missionary. She had returned. The chapel she entered in 1859 was the same one she was said to have died beneath in 1837. Some said she was a revenant. Others said she never died at all. But the truth now had teeth, and the people of Graywick could no longer ignore the bite. On December 12th, at exactly 3 a.m., every bell in Graywick, though none had ropes, rang once. The snow had grown dense by mid-December, muffling the sound of breath, of footsteps, of prayers. It buried door frames, it buried carriages, but it did not bury the past. not completely. On December 14th, 1867, the last postmaster of Greywick, Ira Bell, abandoned his station. He left behind two things: a rusted key to the backroom archives and a final ledger note scrawled beside a column of undelivered letters. The dead are returning their mail. No one knew what he meant until the archives were opened. Inside, crammed behind crates of yellowed telegrams and sunken typewriters, lay an untouched crate marked Orphanage Correspondence, 1836 to 1842. It had not been referenced since before the Civil War. Some pages were stuck together with mildew, others crumbled upon touch. But among them were 11 surviving letters, each written in the same delicate looping hand, addressed to the Diocese of Cincinnati. All from Sister Calphurnia, the nun believed to have overseen St. Eloria's during its founding years. The contents of these letters, dated from October 1836 to August 1837, were never published, but they were transcribed decades later by historian Marla Wren, whose notebooks were donated to the Indiana Historical Society in 1924. In Eichitz, her own hand, she copied passages like this: "We baptized the infant Agnes under the assumption she would not breathe past the hour. But she has grown still, not cold. Her chest neither rises nor falls. Her skin has not grayed. When we held a mirror to her lips, it fogged, but only once. The other sisters believe she lives between and later. On the eve of St. Irenaeus, I found the child seated upright, surrounded by the others. They had drawn a perfect circle of candles around her, none of them yet old enough to write, but symbols marked the floor in soot. She said only this: 'I remember what you built under the floor. I will remember it when the snow returns.'" The floor. 3 days later, a team of remaining townsmen, led by Deputy Harlan and the blacksmith Elias Trunley, pried open the chapel floorboards at St. Eloria's. The excavation revealed not the standard stone foundation, but something older. A second layer of limestone beneath the first, pitted and blackened, as if scorched by fire long ago. It bore an engraving, shallow, crude, unmistakably pre-modern. A wheel of 30 spokes, each ending in a tiny cross. Below it, etched in Latin, "Unum sacrificium, viginti novem stellae, et stella quae non cetidit." One sacrifice, 29 stars, and the drop that never fell. No one could explain its origin. The design did not match any known Catholic or Protestant symbolism. The Latin grammar was imperfect, archaic. But under that stone slab, buried in dry earth, they found an object. Wrapped in a faded cloth, brittle as ash, was a wooden tablet, no longer than a man's forearm, inscribed on one side with tally marks, 29 strokes, then a space, then a final mark, larger, deeper, shaped like an inverted cross. The reverse side bore a child's handprint, charred into the wood. Beneath it, in almost invisible ink, one line: "She was not the first to bleed, only the first to return." Deputy Harlan carried the object back to town hall. By evening, he had locked himself in the basement, refusing food and sleep. When the townsfolk broke down the door 2 days later, they found the tablet gone, and Harlan seated in a circle of salt, staring upward, lips stitched shut with what was later identified as horsehair thread. He never spoke again, and on the morning of December 17th, 30 black candles were discovered burning at the orphanage chapel windows, each flame perfectly still, no smoke, no wick. Word of these events never reached the newspapers. The state authorities had already been warned off after a failed inquiry turned up no bodies, no records, and no cause to intervene. but records from the Delacroix County Historical Office, compiled in 1902, indicate that over the winter of 1867 to 1868, 31 Greywick residents disappeared. Most were children. Others were those who had spoken publicly about Sister Agnes or had aided the excavation. Of the 30, only one was found. On February 12th, 1868, Eetiulit, trapper named Willoughby Crane discovered a wooden box buried in the ice near Tallow Creek. Inside was a preserved human heart. Wrapped in a strip of nun's habit, it was still warm. Pinned to the cloth was a page torn from a book. The print was French, from a Jesuit text banned in 1812. La foi ne réclame pas la chair, mais elle l'utilisera si nécessaire. Faith does not require flesh, but it will use it if necessary. There was no signature, only a final line, written by hand in red wax. The 30th is ready. December 21st, 1867, the longest night of the year. In Greywick, Indiana, the wind ceased. The snow fell straight down in silence, as if time had turned to ash mid-air. No one spoke, no doors opened, not a single chimney breathed smoke. It was as though the entire town had agreed, without word or signal, to wait for something or someone. At exactly 12 a.m., the bells tolled again, 3 times, 30 seconds apart, then silence, then singing. It began from the chapel. Those who heard it described it not as music, but as something ancient trying to become music. It moved like water in the lungs, gentle, choking, echoing without origin. 30 voices, all children, singing in perfect Latin harmony. Adeste in tenebris, nos sumus stelle cadentes, nos sumus stelle relictae, come forth into the dark. We are the falling stars. We are the stars left behind. And then the lights came. Residents described them as lanterns or candle flames moving in slow procession along Wintermere Lane, then turning toward the square. But no one carried them. They hovered, barely above the snow, as if held in cupped hands by something unseen. And with them came the footprints, single file, barefoot, child-sized, leading toward the chapel. Then the doors of St. Eloria's opened. Witnesses, those few brave or paralyzed enough to watch from second-story windows, reported 30 children entering through the open archway. All wore white, all barefoot. Some described them as glowing. Others swore they cast no shadows. A few said they looked like the missing. A few said they looked like the unborn. And at the front of the procession walked a tall figure in a black habit. Her face, they said, was hidden, but her hands were visible, pale, streaked with ash, fingers raw and bound in rosary twine. She held no candle. She held a hammer. For 7 minutes, the chapel glowed from within. Orange, then red, then something like gold reflected in water. The sound of nails, the sound of breath, the sound of nothing, then stillness. At 12:09 a.m., every window in Greywick shattered simultaneously, not from explosion, but implosion, as if the town had inhaled too sharply. And when morning came, the orphanage was gone. Not collapsed, gone. No bricks, no walls, no floor, no altar, no foundation, no stone. Only a perfectly circular depression in the snow, 12 feet deep, 60 feet wide. The ground below had been fused into glass. In the center, a single object remained, a child's wooden cross, cracked, splintered, wrapped in cloth. The cloth bore the sigil of the Daughters of Divine Mercy. No bodies were recovered, no traces of Sister Agnes, no records remained in the rectory. The census listed the orphanage as decommissioned due to storm damage. The official cause of the town's population drop was marked as economic migration. But one account survived, In 1891, a former Greywick resident named Miriam Fennell, age 39, was admitted to a sanatorium outside Springfield, Illinois. In her intake interview, she mentioned being born in a town that vanished. She had no known family, no legal record of birth. In her journal, discovered after her death in 1902, she wrote the following passage: "We were chosen for our silence. She taught us to love the nail, not fear it, to listen to what faith whispers when no one is looking. We crucified only what was already dead. That was her gift. Her voice was the only voice that ever meant anything. When she returns, I will return too." The 30th will open the door Miriam died, clutching a small hand-carved rosary. Inside her mouth, the mortician noted a single sliver of red wood lodged beneath her tongue. It matched the fragment found at the centre of Greywick's glass pit. By the spring thaw of 1868, Greywick had been redrawn on the state maps, not removed, but renamed. The land where the town once stood was now labelled simply Marsh Reserve, unclaimed. The few who remained, less than 24, were quietly relocated by the county. No press was notified, no documentation made public. What had happened in those final months was recorded only in fragments. State Inquiry No. 44C, redacted, found later in a sealed archive in Indianapolis, makes one vague mention. Due to significant weather damage, the structure referred to as St. Eloria's Orphanage was rendered irrecoverable. No survivors, no remains. Site stability compromised. But across the Midwest, echoes lingered. In 1871, a fire destroyed 6 blocks of downtown Delacroix, including the town hall and public school. A single object was recovered from the ashes of the school library, a ledger stamped St. Eloria's Orphanage, its pages perfectly intact despite the blaze. It contained only one list, 30 names, written in what appeared to be children's handwriting. None of the names matched the known records from Greywick. In 1874, a priest named Father Nathaniel Brundage of St. Sebastian's in Ohio wrote a letter to the Vatican, later uncovered in private Jesuit correspondence. A woman came to confession, said she'd once crucified her own shadow, spoke in tongues I had not heard since the seminary. When I asked her name, she said, "Agnes was my beginning. The 30th is my end." He died by drowning 2 weeks later, in his study. There was no water present. In 1889, a railroad surveyor reported finding a glassy depression in the earth near the coordinates of Old Greywick. Though the surrounding area had been reclaimed by thicket and snowdrift, the site itself remained clear, unnaturally so. He described the soil as vitrified, smooth as river glass, and warm to the touch even in February. He noted one other anomaly: a single brass nail, half buried at the centre, shaped like a cross with a rose etched into the head. When he returned a week later with an inspector, the pit was gone. The land was flat, snow-covered. No indentation, no heat. Only a tree had grown there, thin, leafless, bark the colour of bone, and nailed to it, according to the surveyor's notebook sketch, was a small wooden sign: "Choir practice, Sunday." There is no further mention of Sister Agnes in any state registry, ecclesiastical log, or historical index beyond that year. Yet every December, for reasons no one in local government can explain, the land around the former site of Greywick remains closed to foot traffic. The roads are seasonally impassable, though snowfall patterns don't support the claim. And in 1906, a field researcher from Purdue, Dr. Helen Cartwright, documented an odd phenomenon during her geological survey of northern Indiana. at coordinates 41.5639 degrees north, 86.1103 degrees west. A mild electromagnetic interference prevented compass alignment. Soil samples yielded a high concentration of iron, ash, and calcium. At 3 a.m. local time, recording devices captured faint audio resembling choral Latin hymns. No voices were present in the field. Her tapes were lost in a fire, but her journal survives, held in the university's Special Collections archive. On the final page, she wrote, "I had the strangest dream. A nun stood at the edge of the glass pit, whispering to children I could not see. One by one, they handed her nails. One by one, she swallowed them. And then, a final note. What if faith never wanted peace? Today, nothing marks the site. No plaque, no memorial, just cold earth. But in some winters, local hunters say the air changes there. They report hearing distant bells, children's laughter, or footsteps behind them that vanish in the snow. And in rare cases, they find the same thing. A small wooden cross wrapped in cloth, pressed gently into the ice, like it was placed, not dropped. Always 30, never 31. What remains unknown is not merely the fate of the children, or Sister Agnes herself. It is the nature of what she believed. Was she a relic of spiritual delusion, a revenant fueled by ritual, a woman born from trauma, reshaped by myth, or something else entirely, something born once, buried once, and then invited back by the hands of a frightened town? There are no clear answers, only records, fragments, notes left in the margins of forgotten books. But the final clue, if one exists, lies in a single sentence scratched into the underside of a pew recovered from the ruins of St. Eloria's, discovered in 1947 during the demolition of a nearby barn where it had been repurposed. The words are etched crudely, childlike, into the wood. We never wanted to be saved. We wanted to sing thank you for listening. If you found this story haunting, thought-provoking, or unsettling in just the right way, consider subscribing to explore more forgotten mysteries like this, where dark history and imagination blur. And let us know in the comments, what do you think happened to Sister Agnes? Or better yet, do you believe the 30th child ever stopped singing? The end.